Okay, now we enter into part 4 of the origins of pre-dynastic Egypt, and where we're at now is with David Rohl, and he's an Egyptologist, and they had spent some years and quite some many expeditions finding different rock and wall art that are in between the Nile itself and east, in between there and the Red Sea, and they found that there were really only two ways through, which was known in primordial times from the fishermen people and stuff like that, that it comes through in two different ways. But then again, as you can see from perhaps and even in this pic, it's a crisscross curve around maze network, and it's one of those things where there's a lot of ways around, but there's only one successful way through, and it's a way not clearly marked, let us say. And where we're looking at now is some rock wall art that's over here and some that's up here, and then we'll go on to other sites too that he starts describing. But some of these are very important sites. Again, if you haven't seen the rest of the episodes and want to go back to the first part of it, you can go to the very end of this video. If you go to the very end, it'll be up here in your top right hand corner. It'll say part 1, and when we go to the next video, which will be part 5, it'll show it right here. And I am doing them back to back so you can see them as a full presentation with the release. Let's go.
It doesn't look that impressive at the beginning, but I want to focus in on this section here, and we have one of the largest rock carvings in the desert. It's about 1.5 meters in length, with a boat with a very flat bottom. Let me just take it in a little bit closer for you so you can see it better. And again, I'll remove the background.
Always helps. Yeah.
So we have a high prow, high stern, 2 adult figures and 3 what appear to be children here. These 2 adults are carrying bows and they have plumes on their heads. It's almost like a sacred family is coming into Egypt.
But at the same time, there's another person here with a mace in his hand and 2 plumes above his head. You see how the plumes go and they bend at the end? Kind of has an ostrich effect with that too, where they'll bend. A lot of feathers bend in that way too, and eagles, falcons, so on like that. But this would probably be more of an ostrich plume, although they do seem to be quite thinly drawn rather than thick, like they're drawn in a lot of things. But then again, this is pretty much stick art, if you will, people. This is not the only boat that's on this wall either. There's like 6 of them and a few different people, and here's that person right here on the edge holding their hands up.
With perhaps this boy is the oldest, second boy maybe a little girl down here.
Could be a family on that.
You can see another ship up here with another chieftain with a throw stick and the crew as well.
Yep.
Now, all this stuff we found, probably in the region of more than 1,000 boats have been discovered so far, and we've only scratched the surface here. Why do we have so many boats in the desert between the Red Sea and the Nile is a big question. Why aren't these drawings along the Nile? Why don't we see them in the Sahara? We only see them here.
And the first conjecture that people had with this idea is that, well, this is just fishermen, and they're going back and forth, and they may spend the night someplace, and they're just scratching crap on the rocks on the walls. And they're like, no. They start to look at it, and they're like, a lot of this dates to the same time, and there's a lot of symbology with this, and they start picking it apart and figuring it out. Here's one of the first early great Egyptologists, W.M. Flinders Petrie.
We now come to William Matthew Flinders Petrie, who's the father of Egyptian archaeology, and he excavated the site of Nakada, which is the cemetery for the kingdom of Seth in the north, Nubt. And he was the guy who found this remarkable type of pottery and some other very important artifacts.
From Seth in the north.
This is Nakada here, Nakada 2 now. So this is the second phase of Nakada. And these are excavations of tombs from the Nakada 2 period, the elite graves there.
After Sumerian contact.
As 4th millennium. What's important, for the very first time now, we see that the graves are lined with mud bricks. Prior to this, there are no mud bricks in Egypt.
And so, in other words, he's telling you these are the oldest dated mud bricks, and what they're used for is lining tombs, much like in Sumeria, and that these would have been mastabas at one time, but they've been destroyed. and that these little mud bricks right here also are going to end up conspicuously being about the exact same size. You know, houses today are made with certain size bricks, and they're all kind of uniform, pretty much with each other, right? But back then they used much a different size of brick, you know, cubits and so on like that, and it's based on the same sizes too, which is very telling also. But let's continue with this site.
This is the first time we see mud brick architecture, and it's to line the pits of the tombs. In the tombs, this is pre-mummification, we have the bodies of the individuals buried with this remarkable buffware pottery, which appears for the first time.
That buffware pottery has that ship that's on it too, and the lady with her hands poking up. This is a different one than the normal, but this is like ginger. This is, if you'll look it up, the PreDynastic Gibelline mummy is named Ginger, and it's because he has blonde and red hair, and this one has blonde hair also. This one is also stained a little bit harder with red ochre, it seems. But this is the depiction of what one of these burials would look like. Now, a lot of these bodies totally disintegrated out and really didn't turn good, but a few of these were in the right place and with enough sand over them that it really desiccated them and dried them up, much like a piece of beef jerky, and so it did leave them in a perfect mummified position. It's believed they took some of them later and tried to move some of the ancient burials, and when they did, they found that they had been perfectly desiccated like this, and then they started the mummification process out of that. And archaic people already from where? From up in the Proto-Indo-Europeans that had this idea of burials and stuff too. It's around the world, this idea of a natural desiccated mummy. These people started the idea of mummifying somebody, and it's something that we do today. Now, we don't take out all the organs and hollow somebody out and beef jerky them. We embalm them. But in the same way, we're still doing a presentation that's very similar to what this was in ancient times.
At this time. Also in the graves we find zoomorphic statuary made of beautiful stones from the desert, from the eastern desert.
Oh, that's just too bright.
Again, we
now
have
you
these
can kind of
vessels
see the
made of stones.
knurling.
These are log handles. So this is log handled stone vessels. And here we have log handled, you see the log handles here, pottery, this buffware. And always the buffware has these boats with oars and cabins, ostriches and mountains. These are typical decorations we find in the Cylindar too.
And it's the typical decorations we found in those other places too, up in Bulgaria and things, isn't it? Yeah, ostriches. But now we've got a lot of boats going along with it too that you don't really see up there so much. This knurled marbled rock is incredible too, and then how they've carved it out of this. This is some of that Upart stuff where it's like people are making some pretty badass pottery, but what is this? How could you possibly drill that out and get it to, I mean, wow. And then you start to see more and more of it and some thin plates and things like that, and it just blows your mind. I've made a few videos on Uparts, basically off of a lot of people's other just maybe slideshows showing you stuff and then vamping over the top of that, or just grabbing a group of pictures myself. But amazing, the Uparts that come out of this era here, whenever things come together, just like it did in Sumeria when things come together and they develop the plow and all the things and irrigation and math and all the things come out of there. But somebody had to have math going on. Somebody had to have some of this going on. It's amazing how they put just enough of the pieces of the puzzle together to where all of a sudden they're like, oh, okay. And they started, and that started civilization, it seems. It's an odd thing, isn't it? Let's continue with this, though.
Harking back again to the desert. We also see for the very first time in Egypt, and only for a short period, we see cylinder seals. Now, cylinder seals come from Mesopotamia.
They come from Sumer. He always says Mesopotamia, but at the time, the people that had it going on, bang, boom, pow, are the Sumerians. And so these people that came over into Egypt probably would have been something that had very much to do with that. That's one group that comes over in. There's another group that comes over in too. And then there's, of course, primordial Horner people that are there also, that are Caucasians. You look up the definition of Caucasian, it'll tell you all the places they pretty much have figured out they used to be, and Eastern and Horn of Africa is one, and East Africa is Egypt. You know, no matter how butthurt people get, they were Caucasians. It's Caucasians living there today. We're not saying they were pale Nordics, although, yeah, Ramses II is a leucoderm and a redhead and so on, but these cylinder seals are incredible. They're recut in reverse, and you put them on clay and roll them out whenever you do it. It makes a bas relief like they do on the walls. And so that level of technology too is, and it doesn't have much of a precursor either at all. It's just out of nowhere, you know, you have these impressions, which are very much like the rings that the kings used to do and press into wax, and it made your symbol, right? But they're done in a bas relief thing way back here, extremely intricate and so on. And a lot of them have a lot of revealing details in the Sumerians. But yeah, they're here at the start of Egypt. It's clearly noted. They have them in exhibits and so on, but they don't really want to point them out too much, because people that don't study just Egypt and other places find out, hey, why do they have cuneiform? Hey, why do they have these cylinder seals? Hey, they've got the same cows, the same grain. Hey, they've got, yeah, it starts to get that, it starts adding up. Look at that reed boat.
Okay, so the land of the two rivers, Euphrates and Tigris, they invented the cylinder seal, but we see them in Egypt now, in the graves of these people.
Some of the symbols on them too.
Lapis lazuli, in small quantities, but in the elite graves, they have beads made of lapis lazuli.
And you see lapis lazuli all over the Sumerians and the Egyptians, and inlaid around their eyes and things like that, denoting blue eyes a lot of times and stuff. And the early dynastic Egyptians had these crystal blue eyes that are laid in that are incredible. In some of the earliest dynasties, that's why people can't really refute what started it and who these people are and who they are. But lapis lazuli comes in a few different colors, from a turquoisey to an odd mossy green to the blue, but majorly a blue set. And where does that come from? It doesn't come from there at all. He's fixing to tell you.
You know where lapis lazuli comes from? Barakshan in Afghanistan. So how does it get to Egypt in the PreDynastic period? Big question. It then disappears. It's not there in the Old Kingdom. It disappears. One important clue as to when this happens is this guy. We call him Mace Man. He's in a boat, and I'll get you a bigger picture of him. He's in a boat, standing there. He has what appears to be a tail on the back. He's got two plumes on his head, and he's carrying a pear-shaped mace. Okay, now what's a pear-shaped mace? And I'll show you. It's what the kings carried. It's the weapon par excellence of the pharaohs. So whenever you see a pharaoh, he's either smiting his enemy with one of these maces, or he's carrying it, in the case of the Middle Kingdom pharaoh here. So this pear-shaped mace is very important to kingship. It's one of the motifs of kingship.
And it's your scepter. And of course, you're used to seeing a king sitting on a throne, and he has a scepter. That's the king's holding thing. Well, its origins come out of a mace. And whenever they show him in this position, he's doing certain rituals. But when they show him grabbing enemies and smiting them, he is in the Orion position. It's pretty much positioned just like Orion. And he's fixing to show you a couple of connections of that.
Egyptian history. Here is the difference between the two maces. This is the Nakada 1 mace. It's what we call a disc-shaped mace. So it's a thin object like this. And if you hit someone on the arm, you might bruise them. You might be lucky to break their arm. You hit someone on the head with that, and they're dead. This little bit of technology between this and this is the difference between the original people and the ones who conquered the original people.
Right, so there's two sets of them here. Now this is really only 1.5 inches thick or so, and so it's a disc or a mallet, kind of like you see with people using kettle drums and things like that, whereas this thing has about twice as much weight to it, and it really has a good knocking surface to it. And so one is meant to subdue people perhaps, and the other one is not giving a damn and making sure you subdue people, I'm guessing. And so it's more of a war mace type thing. And this looked like a ceremonial one too. It's made out of that cool marbled rock. but these start to be carved in quite different. And again, the shape of this is an ostrich egg, and people don't really get the idea, but that's an egg or an ovum shape right there that they're smacking people with. And this is shown again here shortly.
A little bit of technology. A more heavyweight mace, which when you strike somebody with it, you kill them, you don't wound them. And here you see a typical early dynastic, this is King Den, and you see that he's got a pear-shaped mace and he's smiting his enemies on the head. A motif you see throughout Egyptian history.
It's early, and you can see right here a plume. Up here you see Anubis, you see another plume sticking off the end, and that big curl, that thick curl, that would be like that. Here's a fish, right? So they have his name and his symbology here telling you, and he's grabbing the guy and smiting. And if you look, this is the stance of Orion, right? And that connects the Aryan-Orion connection that goes with that, the standards and stuff. It starts to get just more and more telling. Back here, Dan is still wearing a tail. He has a symbolic tail that he puts on him, which is believed to be a bull's tail cut off, and then it's been tanned and made into a little bullwhipish type thing, and it's attached to your belt at the back of it in some way. You don't really find many of these, if any at all, but you can see what's going on. Also, in his hand, hanging out while he's grabbed a hold of him, it looks like maybe the flail in some way that he already has going on too. And so you see the crook and the flail later, where it shows a shepherd's hook. So now this becomes a little bit different of an effigy always. It's not always a warlike type thing, but more of a shepherding. And the flail is really something that really keeps flies away, if you will, but you can flail the hell out of somebody too. It's not to be messed with.
Ritual slaughter with a mace. Now, you might ask again, like,
God, that's washed out.
Largely, like all the other objects, the pear-shaped mace begins life in Mesopotamia. We see it for the first time in the Uruk period, Uruk IV period. So it's an import from Mesopotamia into Egypt.
Uh-huh.
Here you see a Mesopotamian king, please note the big beard, and in his hand he's carrying a mace. I'll just highlight it. There's his mace, and he's smiting the enemies with his mace, just like the Egyptians.
Yeah, but he's not quite standing in the Orion position, or he's not reared back. If he was, it would be in the same thing. Here also, he doesn't have the bull signs there. He's got them around his chest, or is this supposed to signify his ribs and where his boobs are type of thing? Also, whenever he grabs these people and he binds them up, if you kind of look at it, you can see little heads that are inside of here. And this is a woven net, like a fish net, to where he's grabbed them all up in a fish net is what he's done. Now, when he holds the top of the fish net, the top of the fish net becomes a bird with a face of a Horus type bird face that's been knocked off slightly. Perhaps it was a little too intricate and it broke off somehow, but that's a bird, and you can see that he's holding on to there, and he would smite them with a mace, right? And now this also is a symbology. There is an omphalos, this egg. If you look it up, omphalos, it will show you one that's woven, looks exactly like this, and it's supposed to be set at places that are considered the belly button of the world, if you will. Egypt is also the landmass of all of Europe. If you looked at that and you said, where's the best place to put it, it pretty much centers it right off there too. So kind of neat, but yeah. And the beards, the mace, the smiting position, all of this predates the Egyptian concept of such. And people don't catch this in the cuneiform writing that they have. And now, before this, they had ideograms. And what's hieroglyphics? It's ideograms. It's fancy ideograms, phonetic ideograms. Okay, and then the Phoenicians, they come up with the written language, and it goes from there. Let's see where we're at here. Only about 20. We're going to keep going.
But this is a king from Mesopotamia. This is not an Egyptian king.
It becomes one.
When we look at the Nama palette, you see Nama with his bull's tail, carrying his pear-shaped mace, wearing the red crown, and this is his name.
Really?
name here, Narmer. And here behind him, look at this, is very interesting little object. There's the mace, sorry, in close-up. There's the bull's tail.
Yeah, so see, he's got like a bull's tail. You can see it here, and then it goes down. I'm not sure if it's a bull's tail, because a bull's tail is really not hairy all the way down, and it's got the little hairy part at the end of it more. This seems to be all the way down. It could be another creature, the tail of a jackal perhaps, something along that line. You can also see that his outfit here is done in 3 different types of fabric, 3 different crosshatch tartan type fabric, and then a big woven type fabric, and then of course what would be the outline of the whole thing. And this outfit is not necessarily a Egyptian motif totally at this point. This isn't the regular kilt that they have. And of course, if you take people from up north and take them down there, they're going to instantly start shedding their clothing a little bit more, and you see that. But the mace that's here, but the important thing that's shown here is this symbol, which is the astrea, or the star, that's shown in Sumerian art, denoting a king, and each one had their special thing. This is one in itself.
And we have this servant here, what we call the sandal bearer. He's carrying the sandals of the king, and this is his title. Just like Narmer's name is in front of his face, this guy's title is in front of his face, and this rosette here means God King, in Egyptian at this time, and this is the hem symbol, which is the word for servant. That means servant of the God King. So this is the sandal bearer of the ruler, Narmer.
Well, where you find that God King situation at, right, where they come down to heaven, you know, boom, God King situation, came from Eden, if you will, which is between the Tigris and Euphrates. Didn't necessarily have to come by land. 1 if by land, 2 if by sea. And you see the symbology show up, and he's going to show you how it shows up more in earliest Sumerian artwork too.
Remember that rosette?
Before it's that incredible, just like this, you can tell there are some good.
Netcher, or servant of the God King.
Yeah, Hem Netcher means servant of the God King. Netcher means king, and also the king symbology for Sumeria is Dingir. The king name in Egypt is Engir. Din being a god, In being a lord.
Here we see King Scorpion wearing the white crown with his hoe cutting a canal, and in front of him you see again his name, the God King, Netcher, and here we see the word Scorpion, so King Scorpion. I'm sure you've all seen the movie.
Yeah, we've all seen the Scorpion King.
So at this time,
but have we ever thought about
beginning
this?
Of Dynasty 0 now, we see the pear-shaped mace appearing. We see the bull's tail on the back of the king, representing the bull. We see the rosette, which marks him out as a god king. And we see the high-prowed boats associated with these people in the desert.
We see standards also. We see anamorphology off of animals and plants. And is this date when this originally happened? Is this in the time of Scorpio, which leads into the time of Taurus, and they start going with bull worship, into the time of Aries when they have the rams, and you sacrifice rams and so on, Ramses and all this, and then you lead to the time of Jesus, which goes into Pisces, where Jesus is the fisher of men. Hello?
So now we turn to religious motifs, because religion has to come into this.
Aha.
First of all, let's look at this rosette in more detail.
Looks like a poinsettia. People have said it looks like a pot leaf. No, there's actually some other things that look more like a pot leaf. That looks like a poinsettia, if you will, right? Let's continue.
Here we see a Mesopotamian vessel of Gilgamesh. We've all heard of Gilgamesh.
Yeah.
Controlling 2 lions, wearing a fishnet and holding onto 2 serpents. But what do we have here? We have the rosette. So this name, this word, is originally Mesopotamian. It's not Egyptian.
And Gilgamesh was half divine, or was a priest king, or a god king, right? Well, 2/3 divine, depending on which way you look at that. And How do you get that? Well, you get a half and a half, and isn't that 3/4? Oh, well, anyhow, 2/3 divine. Same symbology.
Another motif we see reflecting later on in history with the tombs is this concept of a ship being dragged by its crew. So here we have
Clean that
a
up,
small
would you?
boat. You can just about make out the cabin here and the goddess figure with the raised arms and the plumes on the head.
Yeah,
But here the crew are dragging the ship across the desert. We see lots of these types of drawings in the desert. Here's another very big example of it.
Now, this is an idea, people, of a funeral procession, if you will, right? Okay.
Where we have a big boat with lots of people in, and we have the rope, and we have the crew dragging the boat, and we have a smaller team at the back. This is very interesting. When you're dragging a boat around the corner, you don't just pull it from the front that way, but your back crew pull it this way to swivel the boat around rocks.
And even though they show you there's 40-something people in this boat, and there's 15 in the back and 15 in the front, that's not reality. I don't think you even want to think that these people sat in the boat while all this was going on. You know, whenever people are pushing your car, you don't just sit around in the car. You have somebody driving it. Well, the driving is in the front and in the back, as he's saying right there, and these people would have been walking along inside of it. But instead of showing a whole bunch of stickmen beside of it, which they do in a few of these depictions, they show you that they're in the boat. Here's these people getting pulled. It's a symbolic thing.
If you want to navigate through the wadis, you have to have a pulling crew at the front and a pulling crew at the back.
Yeah, you have to swing it around through there.
These are typical examples of the type of boats we see. There are many different ones here. Some of them have bulls or cows in the boats, represented in the boats, but you can see the general idea of the dragging.
Yeah, so hopefully you can see this, but even just out front, they'll show you that they have a few stickmen. Well, the stickmen in the middle of the boat says people are in there. So every one of these have ropes, or they have the boat and the goddess thing, and they have the people pulling it, and the people pulling it, the people pulling it. Sometimes sitting on the boat's a cow. Some of these people are better artists than others. See the arms up? Somebody calling, right?
That one, remember for late. Oh, in fact, we'll do it now. If you've ever been to Deir el-Bahari, the temple of Hatshepsut, there is a chapel on the left side, which is called the Chapel of Births. And it's there that Hathor, the cow goddess, is giving birth and suckling the pharaoh, who is Hatshepsut, the female pharaoh. Now, it's very hard to see this wall, so again, I'm going to clear away the background and so you can see what's going on.
Yeah, please do.
Now it becomes clearer. Here is a high-prowed boat, made of reeds because it's bundled together at the top. And you?
Or is it wood by now? Well, it's probably reed still at this point, and bitumen encrusted into them. But let's go on with this. So what we have here is Hathor, the goddess, and Hatshepsut.
Have the goddess Hathor standing in the boat with Hatshepsut in front. But most important of all is we have a wooden sledge under the boat, painted brown, and a rope connected over here where the priests and the rest of the scene are pulling the boat along through the desert, not in the water. Most of these scenes do not involve water. And when a king or a noble is taken to his tomb, he is in a central cabin, his body is lying inside the cabin in a high-prowed boat with an incurved stern, and, of course, it's on a sledge. See the wooden sledge? And there's the rope. So the nobles are pulling along the boat into the Valley of the Kings.
Right, and then it's got the whole chamber that's on here, and this looks like the chambered ossuary type boxes that they make. In fact, it's got the description around it that looks a lot like that. Here's one of the mourners. She stays in the temple, so she stays quite pale. Whoa, she's mourning. Right, and then symbology of a smaller goddess here, and these almost look like the jet pillars, but then they've just really increased the size of them. But
they don't use wheels, they don't use chariots, they don't use carts. They drag the deceased to his tomb in the west in a boat.
Yep.
but on dry land.
No wheels at this point, because through this desert area, I don't know if you've ever like rode a motorcycle or anything, but if you try to ride a motorcycle in sand, you're ditching it, and so it really doesn't work well. The chariots can only be used in certain areas, and early chariots had skinny wheels on them, and it really caused somewhat of a problem too. Now they have domesticated animals and stuff going on here, but they do not have the horse effect. That comes again with another set of Caucasians come later, known as the Hyksos. But that's a much later thing that comes in the middle of everything, and for a while they ran at least half of Egypt and then expelled back out. And that has a lot more to do with Exodus than you think. So people say, well, how could they pull these boats around? He's about to make fun of it because somebody said that at the last one, and he's going to tell you about it. But they pulled these giant Colossus statues along in these sleds, and this is off the wall. And if they're going to do that, then why couldn't they take a boat, which if it's made out of reeds with some bitumen on it and stuff, has got to weigh just tonnage less, and just get one group of guys doing it and a group of guys behind it helping to direct it. Here they show them also pouring water in front of it, allowing it to slip. And I've done a video here recently where these guys did it, and they put all the pull meters on them and all that stuff, seeing, and it cuts it down so much once you get it going that that's the way they could have pulled these giant statues through it. And it really requires sand or almost a mud situation, but you can't build up a berm in front of it. And so the way this first prow is made, it's extremely important, where it keeps pushing it down and out, and they pull it through. And once you pull one of these things through this area, you have made a road.
Now, I had a big debate with Dominic 2 days ago, because he said these big reed boats that he has are too heavy to drag through the desert. And I said to him, I don't agree with you. So I put this in last night for you. This is El Bersha, and this is a famous scene of this huge colossus being dragged by the people through the desert into the Nile Valley. Another example I pulled off the internet is Mons Claudianus, this massive Roman column carved in the quarry 300 kilometers from the Nile, and they intended to drag that to the Nile. So if they can drag that, they can drag a boat.
Now if you looked at the size or the weight of the solar boat itself, and you look at the common cubited out blocks even that they supposedly brought all the way from Aswan, you would have to realize that that block weighs more than that boat, and that boat's going to be easier to pull down than this thing is. But so the feasibility of this is definitely there, but let's continue.
Foreign contact then, this is what we're leading to now. This is not all indigenous. As Robert pointed out very rightly, there is an indigenous population which we could call African, which comes from sub-Sahara and populates the Nile Valley. When the land begins to desiccate and the Sahara starts to dry up, they move into the Nile Valley. They're cattle herders, they worship Hathor, they are very important to astronomy, they're very important to religion, but there's this second element which comes in later, and the two marry together to create pharaonic civilization.
It's actually a triad here. But so you have an endemic population of Horners, and then you have people that are all the way at the end down there towards the delta, and they're the same people very much, but yet they're not. Just like Germany and France aren't the same people, but they each had something going on, and they're trading with each other, but they can't get their crap together. And then a third entity that knows so much more comes into play into the situation, pulls it all together, and now we have that incredible triad that's made out of it. And by sub-Saharan Africans, he doesn't refer to Negroids, although Robert Vival is right there in the crowd, and so he says, so it started with that. If you'll watch the very first of these episodes, he tells you, well, Nakata 1, those people were around too, but then all of a sudden, boom, now they're not anymore. It doesn't show up in genetics. Nubia shows up much later. Nubian A shows up. They basically get slaughtered, and then there's Nubia C. There's a video I've done on an ancient race war. A few of them have done those. There's another one I need to do because there's been another compiling of that information together. Again, too, that it happened in early pre-dynastic times, but none of that leads you to the idea that any of the people there in Egypt itself would have been black people, North Sumerian stuff for their blue-eyed gods. This is Enki that we're looking at here. And, oh, should I spoil it or not? No, I'm going to leave it. Let's go.
Combination of those two cultures which make pharaonic civilization. The one without the other, we would not have had pharaonic civilization. So let's deal with these foreigners. In the Nama palette, we see this famous sort of antithetical panthers with long necks.
Well, there's a lot on there. There's the bull, which is the man becomes the bull, that's on there too. Hopefully y'all can see that real good. It is pretty bright. But now you see these giant panthers that have these long necks. People say it's like a giraffe, but right here's the dip in where they do the makeup at and stuff. This is Sumerian he's about to show you, but they already have Hathor kicked in, right? They already have this bull god person kicked in here off of it. And this is the picture we just looked at a minute ago that has the sign of the divinity, of the, star, if you will, that's there, and the standards of the followers of Horus and Anubis and so on through here. And there's that damn reed boat that showed up, and he had killed some of these people, and their heads are placed between their legs. Let's continue here.
And of course, this is in fact a Mesopotamian motif, because here's a cylinder seal from Mesopotamia with exactly the same motif on it. So
the old cylinder seals, what he's saying right here, they show you cylinder seals, which we just talked about showing up in Egypt, and at the time they did, they already had them here, and older than that have that same motif, this same panther double neck situation going on. Did they make makeup right there? No, this is a rollout cylinder seal. Where does the idea come from for these anthropomorphic giant necked creatures that are under control and doing that stuff? Sumeria.
This is clearly of Mesopotamian origin.
A lot of it is. So much
on
is.
The Jebel El Arak knife.
Here we go.
Very famous flint knife with the ivory handle. If I go in a little bit of detail with some line drawings, you'll see it better. We have two sides of the knife handle. On this side over here, we have what we call the Master of Animals motif, which is where you have, like the Gilgamesh one, you have this person controlling two big lions, and you'll notice that the clothes he's wearing are not Egyptian.
No, he's got the big Sumerian beard. I don't know if you can quite make that out on there. Hopefully he'll come in a little bit farther on it. But also his hat wear, his entire pants, the skirtish type thing that he's wearing and everything. No, this is your Master of Beasts that's going on here. And it's on that Jebel El Arak knife that they date to PreDynastic. It's got the perfect flinting going on here. Beautiful ceremonial knife. Well carved. Boats on it and everything. He's going to go into it though, and who these long-haired people are and the people that used to shave their heads.
He's wearing a chignon band. He's got a heavy coat on. He has a big beard. And on the other side, over here, we have a battle. And in the battle, the prisoners are being led away by short-haired people carrying pear-shaped maces.
This would be your Sumerians with their pear-shaped maces. And because they have the cattle already, they've already had the problem with lice and things probably, and they're already starting to shave themselves. And it's well known that they had that wig thing and the shave deal going on. Sumerian priests shave themselves twice a day. All this type of stuff is written in there. But let's continue. What's he saying more?
The long-haired people are being taken away or murdered or whatever they're going to be happening to them. And all the way through this, it's the short-haired people who are winning the battle and the long-haired ones who are losing. The short-haired people have these high-prowed ships with a high stern, high prow. They have a central cabin and this strange totem here. The losers, the people with the long hair, have the crescent-shaped ships here, and they're drowning in the Nile.
Well, there's strange effigy there. I don't know if you can make it out as small as it is, but that's the woman holding her arms up. And then these other people have boats too, but they're not as cool and they're not high-prowed. So the original Egyptian ships were not quite the same. But after this point, they are this.
This is the first depiction of a battle in history. We don't have one before this.
First depiction of a battle.
It looks like whoever he is was the leader of these people who defeated these people with their high-prowed ships.
Huh? Sounds feasible.
So those are foreign vessels, and those are Nilotic crescent-shaped vessels. Here is a typical Mesopotamian sculpture of, again, Gilgamesh holding the two lions by their tails. This is a master of animal symbols, clearly Mesopotamian in origin.
There's a couple others that they show too. Gilgamesh is holding a lion like he's a giant, and the lion's just a cat, and he's kind of squeeze choking it. And the lion's kind of looking at you like, help me, you know, or whatever. That's another master of animals type thing. But here we're going to see the symbology of all three together in one, I believe.
And we see this same figure that we see on the Nakada knife we see him here. And he's actually serving the sheep of the shrine of Inanna from Uruk at the same time. And here we see him on a boat carrying the portable shrine of Inanna. And you'll notice the shape of this boat is very important to remember. If we compare it now with the one from Nakada, from the knife to this one, you'll see the same idea, same shape. This back struts here, the loop on the back, and this strange thing here, which on the number one seems to have a rock in it, something to do with weighting the front of the prow. And you see it in the Mesopotamian ship, and you see it in the Nakada ship.
And a lot of times you'll have to put weight at the front of a ship, especially if you overprow the front of it, and it allows it to be diving, like it's diving looking into there, so it's cleaving through the water. And if it gets pulled along, it gets pulled along easier. It's almost like a leaf on water, if you will. Anyhow, I think we're seeing a lot of connections, but let's look at another series of dots of connections.
So the Master of Animals motif is from Uruk, from Mesopotamia. The long, heavy gown is typical of Mesopotamian kingship. The full beard that we see in the pharaohs starts in Mesopotamia. We have the chignon headband around the head. We have the hunter, he's called the mighty hunter, or the hunter, we call him the hunter king.
And Orion is Orion the hunter, right? And now what we're looking at is Ningirsu, the god of grain, who went wild. Ninurta, Ningirsu, who we're looking at here, perhaps. Let's continue.
And he actually sails around in a high-prowed boat. So all these elements are Mesopotamian. Now you think this, the white crown of Upper Egypt, of the south, is typically Egyptian. Everybody thinks of this as an Egyptian crown.
Kind of a bowling pin look.
Let's look at the origins of that crown. Well, here we see a cylinder seal impression of the pharaoh with his white crown on. Notice at the back you have the hen-netcher that we saw on the Nama palette. Probably his queen being carried along with a palanquin. It's a very simple image, but it's not Egyptian. It actually comes from Susiana, and Susiana is the Iranian part of Mesopotamia, near Ahwaz.
Yeah, it's down at the end of the Gulf there.
So this is an Egyptian pharaoh on a cylinder seal from Mesopotamia.
What's up with that?
Wearing the white crown. And here is a typical god. This is Enki, the god Enki, with the big beard, wearing his crown with the horns wrapped around it.
Now, Ki means earth, and in its feminine form would have been Kia, right? And then you also have Gaia. This is very much the same thing as the earth, and God's face hovered above the waters, and you have that type of effect. En being Lord, Ki being earth. So instead of being, well, they call him Dingir Enki, so he's Lord of the earth. And originally he was supposedly the major pantheon type guy, but he's relegated once they make an entire full pantheon out, with Enlil overtaking, which is a sky god, which is symbolic by a bird. And you see some of the symbolic plants that they'll have where they've got a pine cone, and sometimes that has a falcon head on it, and people are just like, duh. You're like, okay, so this is supposed to be Enlil, he's God of the air, and you're like, okay, yeah, God of the air. And here we have Horus, and he has wings. This one has wings. Inanna has wings. They have connections. So they have all these bull horns that they put on them, and this is supposed to be like the halo back then, right? And I don't know if they had any way of taking horns and wrapping them around somebody's head like this, and they had to put them all on their head. Or is this like the halo, where it has no weight or effect? Well, what does it look like if we take them off?
Take the horns away and see what we're left with. we're left with the white crown of Upper Egypt.
That's what it pretty much looks
even
like.
the gods of Mesopotamia have the white crown from Upper Egypt as their main crown.
Now, Upper Egypt would have been where they took over at too. So why would they have that same crown, and then that is the crown later for Upper Egypt? Lower has the other symbology with it, right? A couple more connections here, guys, but I think we're going to have to do it for this one. It's hitting on about 45 already on this one. So I'll upload this one, and then we'll go on to part 5 and a conclusion where I just wrap it up again. But like, share, and subscribe. And oh, by the way, I've got a whole nother set of walls